I think we're live. Good evening, everybody. Last week we had a bit of a mix-up going live. It was a times and time zone situation. But we've sorted that out now. I was doing about 5 shows a week. Well, I was doing 5 shows a week on Republic Broadcasting Network. And I've cut that down to 2. I was originally on there Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm back to Tuesdays and Thursdays now. And I wanted to keep up the quality of the content. And in actual fact, the quality of the content wasn't suffering. It was just that it was keeping me from doing other things, like working on our film, The Heretics of London, the Smithfield Martyrs. And you can find out more about that, windowsontheworld.net. You can help us, and you can help us stay on air by supporting the film, and you'll get a copy of the film and invite you to screenings if you're available to come, and if we ever get out of COVID. But we've been reporting on this whole situation for the last 3 months, so I won't go into that now. We're going to have a very different conversation tonight, and a conversation we've had before, but a conversation that we're taking forward all the time. And tonight, I hope it's going to be groundbreaking. We're going to be talking about the presence of other worlds. We're going to be talking about what actually affects many millions of people all over the world. And in medical terms, psychiatrists call this condition often schizophrenia or paranoid schizophrenia. And Jerry Marzinski, our guest tonight, was working with people who suffered this for 35 years, worked in major institutions and mental hospitals in America. And you can find all about Jerry at jerrymarzinski.com. And he's a very fascinating person in the respect that he's about the only person I know from the psychiatric profession who's actually speaking out about this, which affects millions of people. Negative voices, negative entities, negative thoughts, where do they come from? Well, after a lot of investigation, it appears that these things are organized, and it's a big subject. We're going to go into that subject tonight with a very special guest, George, who's been suffering from hearing voices and is willing to talk about it. Many people who suffer from negative entities and negative voices do not want to talk about it because the voices tell them not to. So all this is fascinating, and I'm a little bit exhausted. I'm back in London now, and I've been in Kent, I've been in Somerset over the past month, and I will be informing all the listeners to Windows on the World as to exactly what all that's been about, because it's all about the future of the show and the future of pretty much everyone who's got a functioning brain cell left. So I'm going to introduce our guest now, Jerry Marzinski. Jerry.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, hey again, guys. I've spoken to you through Mark's broadcast several times before, so I'm not going to go into detail on what I learned. I mean, it's on other broadcasts. What I'd like to do tonight is kind of give you an overview and kind of expose the truth. Okay, so schizophrenia is one of the top 10 illnesses in the world, and the psychiatry and the pharmaceutical establishment, and indeed the medical establishment, have recently drummed up another cause for it, and they've done that for year after year after year, for decade after decade. It's the mothers, it's genetics, it's this, it's that, it's whatever. They've come up with some reason, and all those reasons have failed. Their most current one, which was dreamed up by a pharmaceutical industry, is that the brains of those who are mentally ill have some kind of chemical imbalance that causes that mental illness. This has been, not only they have not been able to prove it, it has been disproven over and over and over again, yet they're still teaching this in the medical schools. The drug industry wants that to go out, and it's a lie, it's a fabrication, but it helps sell drugs. All right. So what's happening here is the establishment, the psychiatric, the pharmaceutical establishment, the medical establishment have in the United States reduced the funding for research into schizophrenia down to dregs, just virtually nothing compared to the other illnesses. They did this by manipulating the numbers. So they went from like over 2 million schizophrenics in the United States, and National Institute of Mental Health manipulated the numbers, took all these people and discounted them, the people on the streets, the people in tons of schizophrenics in other places, and they just included the small body and say, well, listen, it's only a few thousand, it's not 2 million. So we're reducing the research. So they have no interest in finding a cure. And what they have now are these antipsychotic drugs that are horrible. They rot out the patient's peripheral nervous system with long-term use. They do physiological damage. They kill brain cells. They're awful. Their side effects are really nasty, but they bring into control the symptoms. So they lessen the symptoms of psychosis, of schizophrenia, but they cure absolutely nothing. So the first thing I want to make clear is that the chemical imbalance theory put out by the establishment is a lie. It's just a bold-faced lie. There is no chemical imbalance. They don't even know what the balance of the brain should be, the chemical balance of the brain should be. They have no idea. They just made this up in the pharmaceutical industry because it sells drugs. Okay, the second thing they've dreamt up, and they fostered on the public, which is in their opinion, it's reasonable, but they haven't done one iota of research into it at all. And that is the notion that the voices that schizophrenics hear are hallucinations, unreal hallucinations. They're not real. Problem is, they haven't done any research into it because they consider them hallucinations. So who would investigate a hallucination? So they don't want to hear anything from the schizophrenics themselves. Schizophrenics have been trying to tell them for decades, hundreds of years, that these voices are real. They're not hallucinations. They're real. They won't listen. They'll say they're hallucinations. We're going to give you these drugs. It's a life sentence. You have schizophrenia, you've got to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life. There is no other cure. And the one professor who actually watched a shaman cure a schizophrenic, and several of them over and over again in Turkey, Dr. Irmak, published a journal article on this. And as soon as it hit the press, the establishment attacked him all up one side and down the other. The academics, the medical staff, the psychiatrists, you're trying to bring us down to the Stone Age. They just blasted him. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to even look into it. And they have no proof otherwise. They've done not one iota of research on the voices. So they have no say. I've done a lot of research on the voices, and they run very specific patterns. And tonight we have a very brave fellow who is also a therapist. He was a licensed therapist in New York. He's been hearing voices for years. He's beaten them down. He's willing to talk about them, and he was hearing them just recently. So what we did is we sat down together and we came up with all these patterns the voices run. And what I'd like to do is turn this over to George, who not only has worked in psychiatric hospitals, he worked in a psychiatric hospital for 5 years, but then he started using meth and he ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and then he ended up with the voices. So he's a very unique individual who's experienced all facets of this psychiatric stuff, inside, outside, and with himself. So we sat down together and I gave him all these patterns that the voices run, and he's going to pick out the ones that he has experienced and talk to you not only about that pattern, but what it feels like, what they were saying to him, and hopefully this will bring some life. This is the first time that I know of that is somebody who's had this disorder is speaking out in public about it. And it takes a very brave character to do that, because the voices, first of all, don't want him to do this. And they were attacking him, I think it was all day yesterday, trying to stop him from doing this. So I'd like to introduce George Jagacek, I think it is. He's in California.
Okay, Jerry, just before we do that, I think that's a great start to the show. And do look at our other interviews with Jerry for some background on this. We've gone into it in great detail, as much as we can, and we're exploring this phenomenon all the time. And both myself and Jerry have experienced it. Jerry, obviously, more than me, but it has been very close to me in my life, not through myself, but through people I was close to and people who've had this phenomena. And it's extremely destructive. And I think it's one of the most important things that we need to deal with, because as we are getting fed with more and more negativity, these negative entities, negative thoughts are going to feed on that. So I'm going to introduce George now, and George and Jerry can carry on the conversation for a while.
Okay. Now, I want people to know there is a way to cure schizophrenia. I mean, it takes some time, it takes some effort, but it can be cured, and we've done it many times.
Okay, that's great, Jerry. I'm going to get you and George on the screen now. Okay. So this is George, our special guest tonight, and I'll leave both George and Jerry on the screen.
Okay, George, your show.
Hi, Jerry. And thank you very much, Mark Winters, for inviting me here. I'm honored to be here. And Jerry, I'm just real happy to be here and have this opportunity to share a little bit about my life and about this amazing, phenomenal experience that I've undergone and still am undergoing. This has been life-changing, to say the least, life-changing, something that has turned my world upside down, and something I never expected to be part of my life in any way growing up.
George, you want to tell them how you got into this? I mean, give them a little bit of background. You work in a psych hospital, you started using meth, you started hearing the voices at that time. Go ahead and start them from the beginning.
Sure. Well, you know, I was an addict, and I went down a very dark road, and it tore me up. It really tore me up, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I believe that absolutely 100%. When I was in the throes of the worst of the addiction, I was seeing visions. I was seeing things, and things that, strangely enough, could be verified by other people who were also using. Paranoia.
That was the shadow people.
Some people call them shadow people. Yes.
You want to give them a brief dip into that, because the shadow people are part of this. Schizophrenics see these three-dimensional shadows. So why don't you give them a little story where you both saw that
Sure.
one shadow people?
So a friend and I went outside the house. It was nighttime, didn't say anything. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, looked around the corner of the house, and I saw 4 people standing between the house and the car. I didn't say a word. I looked at my friend. He looked around the corner. He looked around the corner, and then he came back. Both of us did not say a thing, went into the house, and the first thing out of his voice was, "That's shadow, what we call shadow people." And that was my first introduction to what those were. And so we confirmed that we both saw a number of people standing there between the car and the house. And that got me thinking about, well, what's this? How could I see something, not say anything to anybody, and then have somebody who was also high at the time see the same thing and confirm it without even saying?
So I've run into that same situation where patients I've had confirmed with each other that was happening. Yeah. So this is part of using meth. It's a devil's drug, the prisoners call it. It's one of the most dangerous drugs out there. It does something to your spiritual field. It opens it up and lets these negative things in.
It's the most horrible thing. I think I've said this before. I think it's the most horrible thing man has ever created, not simply because of how it destroys your spiritual body, but the fact that it is so addictive. It is absolutely one of the most difficult things to stop. I, as a licensed professional, as a trained person in the field of mental health who knows all about addiction, all about treatment, had a horrible time. I went to outpatient treatment a number of times, went to 12-step groups, and I went to an inpatient I admitted myself into inpatient for this, and still it was difficult to break until.
You want to tell them how the voices came on while you were using the meth? How they started and then went away and then started and then finally they were there, and I've seen this hundreds of times. I mean, people who are using meth became psychotic. They thought it was a hallucination. It would go away when they came down. And then one day it didn't. and they were as crazy as any schizophrenic in any state hospital. Go ahead and tell them your story.
Exactly right. So I would use, and I would immediately feel a sense of paranoia descend on me, like I was being watched. I would begin to see things moving behind curtains, begin to think I was being watched and observed. And now as I look back on that, I think to myself, wow, what if I am opening myself up to this other world spiritually? And what if these beings are all around us all the time, both positive and negative?
And they are.
And using that deteriorated and destroyed my spiritual body to the point where I could actually see these things, and not only see them, but hear them. So I would start hearing voices. And for about 4 days while the drug was in my system, the voices would last. At the end of that 4 days after the drug had left my system, the voices would go away. Well, this was a recurring pattern.
Now, George, how did you know the difference between your thoughts and these voices? How did you distinguish between the thoughts that you normally have in your head and these external or different thoughts? Because they both came across as thoughts, but you were able to distinguish between them.
Absolutely. I have to say that what I'm experiencing, these air quote voices in my head, are absolutely and distinctly ego dystonic. They are separate from who I am as a person. And I know that in many different ways. But to say that my own personal process in terms of how it came into my system, it first sounded like somebody was in the room, and it would come from different parts of the room, and I would hear it as if I was actually hearing, just like you or anybody else would hear somebody's voice. But as time went by, and as my disease got worse and worse and worse, they descended deeper into my head. I initially started responding to the voices verbally, and I would get it back and forth and back and forth. But then what I realized very quickly is that I could think a response and they would respond to that. So they were clearly deep into my psyche, deep into my mind, to a place where we were communicating telepathically, or we were communicating without speaking. And that
what were you thinking when this started to happen? That's a very strange thing to happen. And so you felt that here's this external entity that didn't belong in your psyche that was communicating with you. And what was it communicating, and what was your experience? What were you thinking as this progressed?
Well, it was horribly intrusive. I mean, my first thought was, because when I first heard it, it sounded extra to me. It sounded like a voice was coming outside of my head. And so what I began thinking was, hey, this is intrusive. Get out. Let's either try to get to know each other. I want you to get to know me. Or if you're going to be rude and insulting and demanding at me, this is intrusive and I want you out. And so it became this process of dealing with something that was always there 24/7. I would hear voices constantly, and still do.
Was it just one voice, or was it several voices? And what would they say to you?
Well, again, it started when I was back in New York, and I was living in this apartment building. I thought it was the neighbor next to us. Well, the voices I would hear was a mother, 2 daughters, and a son. And it was very distinct. The mother was very angry. The 2 daughters were very nice and young, and the son went back and forth between being nice and being angry. And so how the communication transpired was I would hear all their voices, all the distinctly different voices. But in terms of communicating back to the mother, it would have to go through the son. So I would say something or think something, and the son would repeat it back to the mother. It was a little strange in terms of how it played out initially, but over the course of the almost 2.5, 3 years now that I've been hearing voices, things have evolved and changed and shifted. And that's a big part of my story that I want to get into as well.
Now, has that family morphed into just one single voice after a while? Or
no, the mother has dropped away. daughter and the sons, that storyline has dropped away. And when I came to California, things changed. It became very different for me. And it became a process of really understanding who I am. The voices spent a lot of time interrogating me, putting me through a spiritual court.
Can you tell us about that court? What happened in that court?
Well, it was about looking at all my previous behaviors and judging them and trying to understand why I did them and who I was as a person. So there was a once the voices were with me permanently, there was this process of really understanding who I was. And through that process, I myself got to learn about my own idiosyncrasies.
So were they rubbing bad stuff you did in your face? Did they keep throwing it up at you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And then you said you also heard positive ones, and the one positive one said something about go to where it all started.
Well, it's interesting because when you're hearing conversations 24 hours a day, whenever you're conscious, I'm hearing this going on. A lot of stuff is said. So many things, so many storylines come through for me in many different ways. At one point, what was said to me, what I heard clearly was go back to where it all began. That can be interpreted into many different ways. I was in a very dark spot in my life. I was in a bad place. I was not getting what I needed in terms of emotional, physical, and spiritual support. And I heard, go back to where it all began. My interpretation of that was go back to my family. I needed some help. I needed the love and the support that only the family could give. And so that's exactly what I did.
Okay, so that worked out. That worked out well for you. But one of the patterns that the voices run is the negative voices are consistently, unswervingly, incessantly negative.
Yeah, and I have a lot in terms of those patterns that have shown themselves out. Different ways to cope that I want to bring out, and ways of healing that I've really come through this to evolve the voices and to shift my own experience of something very dark into a healthier state of being.
So can you tell the people what the negative voices said to you? Because they usually say the same kind of stuff over and over again.
Yeah. Initially, it was, we're going to kill you. There were stories that went through my head of taking my friends and trying to attempt to kill them. There was, we're going to shoot you. We're going to take you away. We're going to take you into prison. There was a tremendous amount of negative, fear-based communication that came my way that put me in a state of fear that really just stressed me out incredibly, and really made me afraid of the entire experience of what was going on around me.
Okay, so did you get a feeling that they were trying to generate negative emotion in you and a negative paranoid state? Were they
Absolutely.
Like they were going out of their way to do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's one major pattern. Now, that's not just happening with George. That's happened with hundreds of schizophrenics I've spoken to. The voices are consistently negative, insulting, bombastic, nasty, threatening. That's a pattern. Okay.
Well, Jared, I want to throw something in there and make it very, very clear, just to make sure everybody's on the same page on this. And that these voices are separate entities. There is something separate from myself. You asked it before about how do I know it's not just my thoughts. I want to tell you a story. When I was in that house, when I was in that dark place, I always thought that the voices were messing with my computer. And there was interaction with what I saw because they could, of course, know what I knew. They could see what I see. And they would, things would happen on my computer that would foil my attempts to move forward with whatever I wanted to move forward with. So I had the thought, I wanted somebody to come in and change the password for the Wi-Fi. Maybe in my thinking that they would, if they didn't have the password, that I could foil them. And so I had somebody come over to change the Wi-Fi password. They were on one end of the house. I was in the other. I went into the bathroom to wash my hands. Did not want to know what the password was. I made it a point to say, do not tell me, because I didn't want the voices to know, and made it just incredibly clear that this was information that was to be kept away from me. When I was in the other side of the house washing my hands, so I couldn't hear anything, one voice said to another voice, he's changing the password to password. Now, this was new information. This is information I didn't want to know, but I could verify. So I immediately walked out of the bathroom. I went to my friend and I said, did you just change the password to password? And he looked up at me. He said, yes. How did you know?
You know,
The voices told me something I had no idea about, nor did I want to know about. And this proves my point that these are entities that are outside of myself, that are real, and that these voices and what people experience is meaningful because they're words and they are from a different source. There is no doubt in my mind.
And I've experienced that with a number of patients I've worked with, especially with drug addicts. The voices would come when they ran out of drugs, told them where to be, when to be there, and somebody would show up with the drugs, especially the meth guys. There were prisoners where their voices would tell them which houses to rob, when to rob them, generally where the loot was, not specifically, but generally where the loot was, and when the person was up, the owner of the house was up, and when to leave and where to hide. I mean, I've heard this over and over, story after story after story, where the prisoners would say, and people in the psych hospital, they'd say, these things knew stuff that I didn't know. And that when I checked it out, it was true. They had information that I didn't know.
And let me tell you something. They're predictive. They can predict the future. One time the voices told me, you'll be frightened when the electricity goes out 3 times. That's odd. At the time I heard it, I thought, what does that mean? What do you mean I'll be frightened when the electricity goes out 3 times? And I kind of went about my day. Not a week later, the electricity in our house went out 3 times. It went out, came back on, went out again, came back on, and went out 3 times. And that was told to me days before it actually happened. I mean, I have so many stories of how the voices made it absolutely clear that there was something else that had a hand in what I was hearing. This was not my subconscious, not my unconscious. This was a power greater than me.
Yeah, and sometimes they carry that on to like, okay, we've got special powers. You need to listen to us. And I've seen that. I remember one prisoner I was working with where the voices told him, they pointed out a specific guy in the prison yard and said, that guy's going to assault you. So a day or two later, he was in the bathroom and he just took a shower and he was combing his hair, whipping the water out of his hair backward. And that guy who the voices pointed to just walked in the door at that time and got hit in the face with all this water and, beat him up. So they know things that the person himself doesn't or can't know.
If you want to take this really to the next level, that these entities are around us, they somehow got into my head, and I believe it was because of the deterioration of my spiritual body. And they have ways of understanding both the future and the world around us in ways that we have no idea. And what's important about this is that it goes further than that. They're able to influence us in ways that we have no idea, that we don't even think about. We think that we have our own thoughts and our own mind, and that there's a sanctity of mind, but there's not. Because we are influenced every single day by these entities around us. Now you can look at different frameworks, different perspectives of how people look at this, and they say angels and demons. And there's different approaches that I took in my perspective with regard to relating to the voices that I take every day in terms of how I work with them, how I cope with them, how I distance myself from them. But it's real, and they at times they affect my feelings in ways that they have a grip on my feelings. There's ways in which they enhance my feelings in ways that make very, very subtle things much bigger. And if you want to talk about feeding on things like fear, keeping a person in a state of fear, you know, they plant you hear the voice, they plant the message, and you have an emotional reaction, an ability to enhance that. All of a sudden, a small little concern could turn into a major fear. And then
they pour gas.
Right.
They pour gas on the fire. And then
now the entire world just collapses, because when you're in a state of fear, you can't do anything.
And then you're generating a ton of emotional energy and negative emotional energy. And then another pattern that is consistent is that when the voices attack, then that energy is sucked off. So they're energetic parasites, and you're left eviscerated with no energy. They take that energy. So can you talk about how you felt after they attacked you and then withdrew some? What happened to your energy level after a serious attack like that?
There's different ways at which they can attack you. And I think everybody is individual in terms of who they are and how these voices, if they know you, they're going to work with your weaknesses. Okay. So if one can look back at the different behaviors that I had and bring my mind back to them and make me feel ashamed, make me feel less than, make me feel like a horrible person, then they'll just start focusing on that and just start talking about it. And all of a sudden, you know, oh, I'm feeling bad, enhance my emotions. Oh, I'm feeling awful, feel horrible. And now if it comes at a time in which I need to do something positive with my life, if I need to, you know, move forward with my life in a positive fashion, I can't. I'm stuck.
And what's happening with your?
That works. There's also a way that they stress out my body, that I can feel an attack coming on because there's an absolute tension that just pervasive around my entire body, and it's a weight. It just closes in on me. And there's different ways that I rebound out of these attacks.
But what's happening to your energy level while these attacks are going on?
Oh, anytime I'm feeling afraid or shameful or whatever, my energy is way down, way down.
And I've had patients tell me they could actually feel their energy leaving. They could feel it being sucked out of them. So that's a consistent pattern. When they attack, your energy level drops.
Absolutely.
Very noticeably.
Oh yeah, I had one experience one time where it was after an afternoon of really struggling with it, and I laid down on the floor at 7 o'clock in the evening, could not get up. I literally could not get up until I had to, I think, rose at 11 o'clock to go to bed. You know, so it was pretty intense.
Okay, so here's a second pattern. Now, this pattern is the one that the voices don't want anybody to know about. They do not want people to know that they are energetic parasites drawing your life energy from you. But it's a consistent pattern. So those of you who work with schizophrenics can ask them, well, how do you feel after the voices attack you and leave? You'll get a consistent, my energy level's gone. I didn't use the energy. And then you ask them, where did it go? And they go, I don't know. The voices don't want them to know where that energy went. Okay, Jerry, so we got two patterns here.
Yeah, I want to underscore that point that you made there about the voices not wanting you to talk about this. If there's one thing that you can take from this interview, if you're watching this, it's you have to talk about what your experience is, what you're hearing, share it with somebody, a therapist, a loved one, or whatever. Because from the get-go, the voices said, do not talk about us. And it was a way to isolate me, a way to separate me, a way to keep me away from getting through this process, which was a nightmare in so many ways. I mean, my entire security and inner safety was gone, and I was blessed. I mean, I cannot believe how blessed I have been from the beginning of this, because I've had not only friends, but family members who I said to myself from the beginning, I'm hearing voices. I have to talk about it. I have to share this because I'm not lying. I'm not going to lie about it. I've got to tell you what I'm experiencing. And here's, in fact, what I'm hearing. And so I got a lot of pushback from the voices saying, do not talk about this. Do not talk about this. Do not talk about this. And I could tell that when I listened to them and I kind of held back, then things would mount up and it would turn in a bad direction. And so by being able to share this with my family and friends has been one of the biggest blessings, and has been one of the biggest ways to not only cope with this, but kind of push the fear away. Because what would happen is they would come at me and say something that would cause me to be fearful or anxious or shameful or whatever. And I would tell either a friend or a loved one, this is what I'm experiencing right now. And this is this happening. And all of a sudden the fear would go away. So
okay, that's important. So this is yet another pattern. They do not want the person that they invade to talk about them. They want to isolate them from friends. They want to isolate them from family. All they want is just them, so they can beat on the victim. And I with several times when I was working with prisoners, the prisoner would all of a sudden say, "Hey, the voices are telling me not to tell you anything else. You already know too much. They want me to shut up." That's happened over and over and over again. So they don't want people to talk. I remember several patients where the voices told them, if you talk about this, they're going to lock you up and you're going to end up in a loony bin. And unfortunately, George was lucky. But a lot of times what happens is the person talks to their family, and their family gets all upset, takes them in front of a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist drugs them silly, and now they're just, in the ozone land. I mean, yeah. And all those drugs do is just suppress the symptoms. And psychiatry is saying, "Oh, these aren't real. These are hallucinations." No, hallucinations don't run these kind of patterns. And this is just three patterns we've talked of. I mean, there's another one. They attack after dark mostly, right, George? Didn't you experience that? They get stronger after dark.
In the evening, during the day. At this point in my experience, I have a little bit more peace in my life because I believe of all of the healing and recovery that I've done in my sobriety. But yes, in the evening, it's much more difficult, because what happens is I will get these attacks, and I will get these intrusions at a higher volume, at a more negative, at how it comes at me, the tone of which it comes at me. And that's where I want to talk about some of the things that I use to cope with the voices, and some of the things that I absolutely believe have helped heal me, because I'm at a very different place in this experience of hearing voices.
Let's run through these patterns first, George, and then do that. So sure. we need to show the people that these things are running patterns. They're not hallucinations. Sure. Hallucinations don't run patterns. So they're consistently negative. They zap your energy. They know stuff that you don't know. Now, how did they react? I found them to be consistently anti-religious and anti-Bible. The negative voices want nothing to do with preachers, the Bible, prayers, anything like that.
Yeah, it was interesting. At one point, early on in this experience, I had turned to the Jewish faith, and I found the prayers in the Jewish faith absolutely beautiful. I mean, stunningly beautiful, and they were prayers to God. And I have a deep faith in God and a belief in God, and I feel that has been at the core of who I am, that has buoyed me along through this. But as I was reading from the Jewish book of prayers, I would hear, "You can't read that. You can't read that. You shouldn't read that." I got attacked in temple one time. I went to temple, and they were just screaming at me and coming at me, and saying I shouldn't be there. And so there were at times when they were terribly anti-religious, did not want me to be religious, but I stuck through it, persevered, and to this day, prayer in the morning, prayer in the evening is still a very important part of how I cope and how I've come through this.
And this pattern is consistent with the hundreds of schizophrenics I've worked with. They broke up into three categories. If the voices were weak and they tried to go to church, the voices would shut up in the church. If the voices were moderate strength and they went to church, then the voices would get louder in the church and try to block them from hearing whatever the preacher was trying to say. If the voices were very strong, they would actually drive them out of the church, and they would jump up and run out of the church. So why would a hallucination be anti-religious? I mean, for what reason? It shouldn't bother a hallucination at all. But this is another consistent pattern. They're consistently anti-religious, anti-God, anti-spiritual, anything. they will attack it and they'll get louder. And the 23rd Psalm is like burning them with a hot stick. They can't stand it. One patient told me that when he repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted like throwing worms on a hot frying pan. So here we have another pattern. You wouldn't expect a hallucination to be anti-religious. Now, another thing you said, George, is they block you from doing stuff that you really enjoyed. They put a damper on it. They tried to steer you away from it. They didn't want you to experience any joy or happiness. How did they interfere with that?
So they very interesting. There were two distinct ways that one can block somebody or interfere. One is just by saying, don't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or talking bad or down about it. But again, like I said, these voices, they got to know me, and they knew my strengths and my weaknesses. Now, nobody likes to be told what to do. Nobody likes that. So if somebody's coming at you and go, pick that up, don't do that, brush your teeth now. You know, I mean, you have an innate response to either clamp up or resist. So another way that they would steer me away from something was by pushing me harder to do it. You have to do it. You have to do it. You have to do it. Part of who I am. It's like, no, I don't have to do that. And so I would veer away. So there were two ways that they would push me away from something that I love, telling me it was horrible and bad and awful, or pushing me so hard towards it that I myself reacted by turning away from it. It was absolutely brilliant in terms of getting me to move away from something that I was passionate about, and that enlivened me. And that's the real key element here, because when I was what I call under a spell, when I was at a place where I was feeling horrible about myself, I felt that they were on top of me, that they were draining my energy. There was one particular experience that I'll share because it was so dramatic. I was just down. I could barely, get to the computer, and I was going to this meeting, and there was a friend of mine in the meeting who was just vivacious and bubbly and just full of life. And as soon as he and I connected and I started joking around and laughed, it broke the spell. And it was like, it was me again. That there was that part before where they were just you've often said the word feeding off me, feeding off my energy, where they were just holding me down. But then the laughter, the life, and the connection I had with my friend, even over the internet, broke that entire grip on me. And I was able to come out of it and go, yes, this is who I am. And right now, what you're seeing is a much better, a much healthier person than who I was 2 years ago in the throes of my addiction. And part of that has been embracing life in many different ways. And
I've seen that phenomenon a number of times where they kind of put you into a hypnotic state and hold you there. And that's where the rubber band, snapping the rubber band, would break that state. So when I first started experimenting with ways to interfere with these patterns, I knew the 23rd Psalm had that effect on them. Mm-hmm. So I'd ask the prisoners to wear rubber bands when they heard the voices, snap it, and then repeat the 23rd Psalm. That gave them some way to fight back.
You've got two things going on there. You've got a physical feeling, and you've got this religious, this spiritual energy coming through you. And when I read the Bible, basically, I barely hear the voices at all. When I read the Bible, the voices go away completely. There was something that came through for me at one point about, if you have the words of the Bible, of the good book in your head, then the angels are able to influence you in a positive way. But if you don't have the words of the good book in your head, then you're influenced by these demons, because you don't have that core belief system in place. And so whenever I read the Bible, they go away. Now, physical, it's interesting, because if they're inside of us, and I absolutely believe that they can inhabit us in ways that we don't even understand.
Yes.
You were talking about the rubber band having an effect and kicking them out. When I got a tattoo during the course of this experience, and when I was getting a tattoo, they were gone. And so you and I have talked about how these things can possibly, maybe the sensations, the bodily felt sensations and smells, affect them at a greater way then it affects us. So when I was getting a tattoo, they couldn't take it because it's pins going into my arm. You know, it was very painful, and they couldn't take it, and so they left. The rubber band, painful, and so they leave. And then when they're gone, you know, I'm doing things that are healthy for myself, reading the Bible, praying, I'm doing yoga, things like that.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Some patients told me that the snap on the rubber band hurt the voices like 10 times worse than it hurt them. And there was a psychiatrist back in the 20s who was using static electricity and would administer static electricity shocks and would drive them out temporarily that way.
Yeah.
So there's another pattern. So another one is they constantly push for more control.
Oh, that was really interesting. You know, in the beginning, I was I'll say buying in, or I was relating better to them, and for me, I felt like they were drawing me in. It got to a point where they told me flat out, "We have to control you." They said, "We have to control you," and I said, "No, that's wrong." Yeah, I drew the line, and I said, "No, you cannot control me." And in fact, one day I was sitting on the couch, and it actually felt like an entity was coming into my body. And had a grip on my heart. And I sat there energetically, and I literally energetically pushed this being out of my body, and it snapped at one point and it was gone. But it's been fascinating how to think that something could come inside of our body and influence us physically as well as mentally, and in subtle ways, in ways in which we don't even realize when we're going about our normal day.
And this is what's unique to George. Like myself, when I first ran into this phenomenon, I'm like, what's going on here? You know, what's happening? George saw it in himself, and instead of just, you know, suffering under it and like, you know, like most people do, hey, what's going on? I'm crazy. And psychiatry telling you you're crazy and that your brain is broken. George turned around and looked at me and like, well, okay, what's going on? What are these things? How are they affecting me? What are they doing? He started investigating them. And that's very unusual. And it's very unusual for somebody who suffered years of this to get up and actually talk about it. Sherry's the only other person who I know who does that.
Jerry, what I want to let you know here is that, you know, I knew who I was, who I am, who I was before hearing voices, and I knew this experience layered on top of who I was. And so I held on very tightly with my core self, my core inner being of who I am. And I believe I'm a solid, good person. And I held on to that tightly because this experience tried to pull me away from that in many different ways. Now, the thing that's important here is that you talk about patterns. Early on, when I was doing some investigation around this and talking about this and sharing with other people about what's happening, I said, I have to go to a neurologist. I want to take an MRI and see if there are, because if you look at some of the symptoms, it could be caused by all kinds of
other things,
right? And so I wanted to get MRI and have a checkup. I went and saw a well-known neurologist in New York. And so I went and told him what was going on. He's given me the test. He's given me an assessment. And he says, so tell me, what do the voices sound like? And I told him, I said, well, right now, it's a mother, 2 daughters, and a son. Now, as soon as I said the cast of characters that I was hearing, he stopped, he put his pen down, he looked at me shocked. And I said, why? What's wrong with that? And he said, that's exactly what my last patient said his experience was. Now, here's 2 people, completely random, in the middle of New York City, who go to a neurologist the exact same week, and within the course of 1 week, tell that neurologist that their psychosis is exactly the same thing. A mother, 2 daughters, and a son. That's what I was hearing that I reported, and that's exactly what the neurologist said his other patient reported to him that he was hearing. Now, that to me shook me to my core. As a side note, what I want to say is when I left that neurologist, he says that all my blood work came back fine, except I was deficient in niacin, severely deficient in niacin. Strangely enough, when I got back to California, my sister sent me an article that about this doctor who had cured this woman of hearing voices with high levels of niacin and vitamin C treatment. You know, it shook me. And so I immediately began taking niacin and high levels of vitamin C. And I really believe it has been part of my healing process as well.
Okay, and before you came on, like yesterday, you were telling me that the voices were jumping all over you. They didn't want you to come on speaking about them and this stuff. And you got a headache or what? How about telling us what you went through yesterday while they were trying to stop you from coming onto the show and talking about them?
I think from the beginning, in many, many different ways, the voices have wanted me either not to talk about it or to not do things in my life in terms of moving ahead in a fully embodied way, in a fully life affirming way. And
they were holding you back.
They held me back. Many times they held me back. And I have to say that who I am in my core being is I want to help people. I got into the field of mental health, and I got into the field of as a creative arts therapist because I believe in people. I love people. I want to help people. And so the reason I'm here today is only to put forth my actual experience. No lies, no pumping anything up. This is actually what happened, so that it might help somebody. Now, if I can help somebody through any of these, through sharing my own experience, that's why I'm here. Now, if we are actually in a war, if there are beings that are negative and if there are beings that are positive that are influencing us, of course, I want everybody to be at their best. And if there are negative beings that are doing things to us in ways that we don't understand, holding us down emotionally, holding us down psychically, filling us with fear in ways that we don't even think about, then that is what we need to work against. That's what we need to fight against, because each one of us has a bit of God in us. We are all children of God. And I believe that if we just allow that to come out, it works against these negative beings that really worked as hard as they can to attack me. And coming on the show was part of sharing this experience. So if I can put out there the positivity, the ways in which I have, come through this experience and really fought these battles, then of course, yes, they didn't want me to talk about it. And in many different ways, they came at me and attacked me, tried to bring me down energetically, or tried to convince me in ways that what I was doing was wrong. And one of the things that I held on to from the beginning, Jerry, was the line, "The truth shall set you free." And from the beginning, I have said to my family, to my friends, and now on air, that I am only telling the truth of this experience.
Yeah, my experience with George is he's truthful to a T. I mean, he doesn't hold anything back. I mean, he's like, when I first met him, he started telling me his stories, and he just was upfront with everything. So can you talk about the battle that you fought to get to the place where you can come and talk with us today? I mean, you said you were under attack yesterday.
Yeah. It was not yesterday. It was a couple of days ago.
And what was that battle like? How did that unfold?
Well, again, it's part. The majority of the energy comes at me in the evening, and so it descends on me. It tightens up my body. It gets me tight with tension. And it makes things, daily chores that I enjoy doing, almost miserable. When we talk about the rates of suicide for people with schizophrenia, I absolutely understand it completely. Because if you have an internal world that is being invaded and that is being completely condemned, and beaten up constantly in your head. You're hearing negative things. You're hearing, you shouldn't do that. You're a bad person. This is awful. However it comes at you. Taking your life is absolutely one of those options that went through my head. I can't tell you how many times. In fact,
then you have psychiatry jumping in there and going, your brain is broken. There's nothing to be done about it. Your situation is hopeless. It's like that Dante's Inferno bridge. All who cross here dump your hope. There is no hope.
One of the things I want to back you up on, Jerry, that a psychiatrist told me is that ignore the voices. There's no way to ignore these voices.
No, they get louder.
When people try to ignore it, you can't. And the fact of the matter is that logical sentences get through, and these logical sentences have meaning, and this meaning has an impact on your life. And these people who hear voices are under a tremendous amount of challenges, of hurdles, of difficulties. And I feel that again, it's been made evidentiary clear that the rates of suicide in people who are schizophrenic
more than 3 times higher.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's interesting is the suicide rate for psychiatrists is almost exactly the same as it is for schizophrenics. More than 3 times higher than the general population.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It showed me in part of my healing process, anything I did that was life affirming drove the voices away. Anything that was life affirming. And I don't know if that's the direction you wanted to go right now in terms of the healing and recovery, because I think that it really says a lot about these are the things that each one of us, whether you're hearing voices or not, whether you can do for your life to keep it clean, spiritually clean and physically clean, so that you're not influenced by these negative entities that are around us.
Well, Swedenborg said that none of your thoughts are your own. And what we're taught from the time we're born is that, all your thoughts are your own. That who else would they belong to? I mean, if they're in your head, they must be your thoughts until you start experiencing something like you're talking about, where they weren't your thoughts. Now, what Sherry says is, she says that every negative thought about yourself or somebody else comes from the dark side, and that they're all lies, and that these voices are the masters of lying. They could care less about you. They want that energy. They want that loosh. They want that negative emotional energy.
Understanding how the ego is a construct has been an interesting part of this, because again, it's finding the healthy part of myself through this, and still dealing with the negativity that comes through, and seeing at the subtle aspects of where that negativity, where those thoughts come from. And I'll be doing something, and I'll have just a horrible flash of bad thought come through my head, and I'm just like, how did that happen? And I say, there's a line I say when I now experience something negative that really helps, and that's, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you, I love you. Because this
high frequency words, they can't deal with that.
Right. The negative thought I'm really seeing as that's not me. That's not me. And I've been doing it over, and that practice has been slow in coming. But whenever I experience something negative, I say, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you, I love you. And I move forward, and I say, that's not me. And these things really work. They change who you are. If you have a thought that comes through your head that is less than optimal, that is less than the best you can be, let it go. Don't dwell on it. And you can use these techniques like, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you, I love you. Or you could say, that's not me, and use something.
That's a lie.
That's a lie.
That's a lie.
Your program.
What they're trying to do is hook you into believe. Since people believe that all their thoughts are their own, these things can inject thoughts into your thought stream. And if you buy that as your own, then you'll think that came from you. And I've had scores of patients ask the voices, who are you? What are you? And they would say, we are you. They want you to believe that those thoughts that appear in your head, those negative, self-defacing, degrading thoughts that appear in your head, they're yours, they belong to you, you own them. That's not how it works. Yeah, and psychiatry is so far off base with that. They have no spiritual grounding whatsoever. Everything is physiological. It's chemical. For 1,000 years now, they have not been able to find a cure to schizophrenia. They can't conceive of an illness that has no physical cause and no physical cure. It's just, they can't wrap their heads around that.
This is a real spiritual battle. And I caused the deterioration of my spiritual being. And I saw how bad it got. And I absolutely agree. I feel like I opened myself up to a spiritual world. And slowly I've been healing from that. And healing means moving towards life. That is healing. My perspective at this point in terms of God, in terms of if God is love, as something as simple as that, if God is love and has a master plan, the more that we heal and get rid of the negativity, the more that we're in line kind of with the positivity and the loving aspect of God, and that flows down to us. And so when the other thing that was incredibly helpful for me was holding gratitude in my heart.
Yes.
When I hold gratitude in my heart, and when I understand that every aspect of positivity, is coming from God, that's, bam, it would knock everything out. And in fact, the voices told me one time, they say, when I was holding gratitude, practicing holding gratitude in my heart, we can't see you. We can't see you. So
that's interesting.
You hold gratitude in your heart. You hold love in your heart. I went through a big process of really understanding humility, gratitude, and love, and how important those are to keep the negativity away. Because I think each and every one of us, through the course of our daily lives, we'll have doubts and we'll have experiences where we're doing something and we say, well, I can't do that. No, I'm not good enough. And that's what would eat away at me and would, well, if I can't do it, then I'm not going to put the energy into it. No, somebody else can do it. Well, no, that's them that are just trying to tear you down and not make us into the best that we can be. Somebody's in the Bible where it talks about us being trapped in sin, being trapped in this, and that's what it feels like, is that this is a constant trap that you have to fight to get out of. You have to say, that's not me. I'm the best me I can. And I kept saying that through this process. No, I'm going to be the best me I can. And that life affirming changed everything for me.
So what George is saying is you are responsible for your thoughts, and they don't all come from you.
Well, you're responsible for dwelling on your thoughts. If you have a doubt that comes into your head, let it go and say, that's not me. That's not me. And then do your best and try it. This living life takes effort. It's work. It's a challenge. And so you have a doubt that comes in. If you look at it as this negativity, these demons, these entities that are trying to hold us back and trying to foil all of us humans being the best we can be, then you're letting them win. And it's been a constant battle of being life affirming and doing those things in life that elevate my frequency, my embrace of life in many different ways.
So I think what George is trying to say here is that they don't just hit schizophrenics. They're most noticeable there, but they hit us all. They hit us all to different degrees. And like George was saying, when a horrible thought pops in, you're just walking around doing your thing, and all of a sudden a horrible thought just comes into your mind, and it's just so earth-shaking, it just stops you cold. And you go, where did that come from? I'd never do anything like that. I don't want to even think anything like that. But it upsets you just to have that thought.
It's not you.
It's not you. That's a zinger. They're sending in a zinger. And everybody goes, whoa, that's my thought. How could I think such a horrible thing? And then it stirs you up.
Exactly.
So what they're after is the generation of that negative emotional energy. And you look at what's happening around the world right now, man, there's so much negative emotional energy being generated.
Yeah.
People need to know what George is saying. These things are out there, and they're getting everybody, and they're getting entire nations. I mean, look at the Communist Party. I mean, they're not providing any help to these people over there that are dying and drowning and nothing. They haven't even showed up at the sites where the damage is. I mean,
I think we know so little about how being human is connected to the spiritual world, that when these breakdowns occur, we need to be real about it. You know, it was interesting. An article came to me at Temple one time that said, if our biggest religious leaders, Jesus, Muhammad, Abraham, if they were alive today, they would be diagnosed as schizophrenics.
Yeah.
You know, these entities, these voices that we hear, these visions that you have, that each one of us have, you know, we are living in a spiritual world. And, you know, people talk about the matrix. People talk about, you know, this is not real, and what's going on around us is real. We don't notice how we are influenced by the unseen.
And Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, lived 700 years ago. He wrote all about that in his book, Heaven and Hell. He had access to those places, and he went and he came back and wrote about it. And the first clinical psychologist to pick up on that was Wilson Van Dusen, who I worked with for maybe a year and a half. He saw that the negative voices exactly matched what Swedenborg was describing as evil spirits. There was a direct match between what Swedenborg was saying and what Wilson was seeing with the negative voices of his schizophrenics. So, you know, it goes from there. And psychology and psychiatry have, it's the most it's like the Sahara Desert when it comes to spirituality. There is nothing spiritual in there. I mean, it's all intellectual, egotistical stuff. And 90% of what psychology publishes is not replicable. So in short, it's garbage.
You know, I will say, Jerry, that part of the medicine, the prescriptions that psychiatrists write are to calm and to quiet, but it's a panacea.
They're major tranquilizers.
Right. It's a panacea. It does not hit at the root of what is going on. And
not at all.
I think for me, the big lesson for me through this entire process, and continues to be, is to see how, when in my life I veer toward life, toward health, toward healing, toward those things that we typically think of, oh, you know, that's good for you, you know. But no, they have a huge impact on so much more than just our body. You know, I have to say, meditation, yoga, and truth has been a gift through this. Every time I do yoga, it calms my mind and it quiets the voices.
Yeah, and they don't want you to do that. Have they tried to stop you from doing that?
Not directly, in indirect ways, in ways that have been a little bit more challenging to understand. But you know, look, I gravitate towards anything that brings peace to my mind, and things like exercise, things like yoga, things like talking about my experience. All those things have been healing in this process.
Yeah. See, that was another pattern. They don't want you to talk about it. Now, God, I had that thought on the tip of my tongue there. We're talking about patterns here. So we've gone through several patterns that these things run consistently. Now, George, you discovered this on your own. And that's where I started working when I was working at the state psychiatric hospital, was disrupting these patterns and how to disrupt these patterns. Yeah. And then when I got to working in the psych department in the state prison, got better at figuring out how to disrupt these patterns. But you discovered that on your own. You know, you saw that if you could disrupt the patterns that these things were hitting you with, that they couldn't get through and they couldn't have an effect. Do you want to talk about some of those patterns you discovered? It was the inky binky, you know, that stuff. And, you know, you had several ways to disrupt their patterns to keep them from getting their claws into you. Because if they can't get their message through, and, you know, when I was going through graduate school, when they say these things are auditory hallucinations, I thought they were like word cabbage, just, you know, words, random words that didn't mean anything. No, they come across in consistent, coherent sentences, and the aim of those sentences is negative, and they have meaning, and they're attacking.
Yes, that meaning affects your feelings, and your feeling state of being is so important in this. And I'll say that you know, one way that's just kind of insidious in this process of hearing voices is that, you know, we live in this world, in this reality. You know, here's my body, here's my shirt, you know, here's my glasses. Okay, this is the world we live at. Well, these voices pull me away from that and into my head. So that in and of itself is that taking me away from this world is insidious because it keeps me occupied. And I had to fight against that. I had to push through being torn away from this plane of existence. And that's one way at which the voices attack you, by pulling you out of this reality. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do, because again, you can't just ignore it. You can't ignore the voices. The words have meaning and it has an impact. So what do you do? There are many different ways that I've found that are coping mechanisms. One was staying clear of negative feelings. Again, I go back to holding love in your heart, feeling gratitude, and positivity. Positivity has been hugely enhancing in terms of finding peace in my mind.
And that means stay away from negative movies, negative people, negative books. All negative stuff feeds these things.
Right,
you know,
right.
So don't watch horror movies.
Positive. Turning everything around into a positive is what I was challenged to do each and every day. When it got really bad, when the negativity got really bad, what I would do is I would talk over them, and not talk like this, but I would use my head voice, is what many people say, and I would make up words, and these words would make me giggle. Iggity piggity pop. You know, it doesn't matter what the word is, but I would just think in my head these words. I would make up word salad, and they would not let their fear, their meaning, it wouldn't let their words get through. Therefore, they didn't have meaning. Therefore, they couldn't fear me. And so, by over talking them, it had a tremendously powerful impact, because all of a sudden I put up a wall, and they couldn't get through.
He was breaking up the patterns. So doing what he could to keep them from getting through, and that's one physical, mental way they could do that. There's a number. You've come up with others also, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, reading the Bible was a big one. It almost makes the voices go away. Talking about them, I've talked about before. Interestingly enough,
let me inject there. You have to watch who you talk to them about. You know, because if you talk to the wrong people, it could make it a lot worse. I've talked to a lot of patients where they told their friends, and their friends backed away from them. Oh, you're possessed. There's something wrong with you. George is part of a Hearing Voices group, and I think it's national now or international. I know there's one in England where you can join these groups and actually talk to other people who are experiencing these same things. You know, and there's millions of them.
Yeah, the Hearing Voices Network was been a godsend for me, because again, it's like a 12-step meeting. These people meet online on Zoom meetings, and there's a dozen or more people at each meeting, and we talk about what our voices are saying, what we're doing, how we're coping with them, what helps, what hurts, and what gets us through. This is a safe place to talk about your experience, and so if you're hearing voices, you can share this with others in a way that again, what for me. It's moving toward a peace of mind is the direction and the path that I have chosen to find, to try to discover. One other thing that has been really powerful is on YouTube. There's a thing called Pure Tones, and 963 HZ. 963 HZ is a pure tone, and when I play these pure tones, it tends to push these voices away as well. And so, during the course of the day, I would be inundated with a myriad of different ways at which they would approach me, or they would attack me, or they would come at me, and each one of these ways dealt with those different different approaches, over talking them, the 963 megahertz, reading the Bible, keeping myself clean, exercising did a lot. The ones that attacked me or got me anxious, exercise was great. And and then there's a lot of other things that I felt were more subtle and were helpful. I really believe in dream catchers, and I have learned and collected about crystals and incense and things like that. And some of those things I feel really help me, because I feel it enhances my own sense of positivity about my home space. And so again, I go back to this is an attack on feelings, on, you know, how you go about your daily life in your state of feeling. And I feel like when we are at peace, when we don't hear voices, we have a certain grace, we have a certain peace of mind. But when that's taken away, we can speculate as to why or how it comes about. I think the goal really remains getting back to that state of inner peace. And for me,
yes,
it was a deterioration of my spiritual being, and shifting really, you know, this spiritual awakening that I had. Now I have to say, I have to share with you the story, because for the listeners here, this was one of the most powerful things for me. I feel that there have been positive influences on me, whether they were the voices or not, it doesn't matter. But one time I went out to pray, and spirituality and religion was not a big part of my life, and so coming into prayer and coming into church and coming into reading the Bible has been new for me in many different ways. So one day I go out to the pool, and I go to pray, and I was being very honest about my relationship with Jesus, and I said, you know, I don't have a relationship with Jesus. I need to learn about that. And as I said those words, I looked over in the pool, and in the pool, floating in the water, was a perfect letter J, made out of the petals of a razzleberry bush. And if you know what a razzleberry bush is, the petals are straight. And this for me, it was an absolute miracle, because those petals lined up perfectly. It wasn't one or two or three, it was 7 of them, and that formed that perfect J. So as I go out to the pool to pray, and I say I need to understand my relationship with Jesus more, I looked over, and in the pool was a letter J. And that, for me, I keep going back to that, because that meant the world to me. It meant that there was a higher power out there that was watching over me through this. And even now I just get teared up, because it was so powerful. It was like, you can do this, you can get through this. And it is about embracing life. And it is about all these subtle things that we know are good for us, you know, eating well, doing meditation, yoga, you know, being passionate about life, exercising, sleeping well, having a good diet. It's like it has an impact. It pushes negative entities away from you. And if you want to be, I just, you know, even now I feel filled with the Spirit, filled with, you know, what I call truth in what is real, then those are the steps you have to take.
Well, we're all spiritual beings, which seems to be denied by psychiatry and the medical establishment and psychology. I mean, they don't talk about spirit at all. So you are a spiritual being. I mean, you are a consciousness. You're a conscious entity, and normally the positive side will speak through feeling and intuition. But if you have all this crap running through your head all the time, and it's all negative and it's swirling around, you can't even hear that. You have to calm down to the point to where you can begin to feel intuition and feelings and get in touch with those things. That calm, still voice within, it's there trying to get through. It can't get through this barrage of garbage that these negative entities are throwing at you. And it happens all the time. It happens everywhere in life. I mean, when you start running your head, you've lost control of that contact.
Absolutely. And I love that you said the still small voice inside of you, because there's a prayer in the Jewish book of the Siddur that speaks about, God, help me open up to that still small voice inside of me. And what I would experience is screaming as loud as, you know, coming at me negatively. And I knew deep inside of there was still that still small voice inside of me that I could reach. And it has been this process of going through these screams, this negativity, and learning this process, and that's what I want to share with people, because you're absolutely right. It's not just people who hear voices. It's everybody.
Everybody.
We are all being influenced by these entities.
Yes, and look at the television. Look what goes on right now. Look at the news. Look at the television. It's all negative stuff. The commercials, every other commercial is a drug commercial. They want you looking outside yourself. They want you focusing outside. None of the answers are outside. Everything is in here. Everything you see around you is in here. It has to come in, and you have it inside. Everything, your mind, and they want to drug your mind. The drug companies are just constantly inventing all these diseases and advertising them on television. And go, oh yeah, if you have these symptoms, which virtually everybody, we have this medicine. I mean, and the psychiatric meds, the only improvements they made is in the side effects. They're still dangerous. They still rot out your nervous system. They're still bad for you. They still turn you into a zombie. You're no longer a conscious, fully conscious being. You're drugged up, and that's their answer to everything. Drug them up. Look at all the psychiatric disabilities. They're all made up. Every single one in that DSM-4. They're at 5 now. They're all made up. They're made up by this group of psychiatrists who just out of thin air go, oh, well, this guy got this symptoms, we'll call it this. And they're increasing every year. It started out with 75 or 79. Now it's up over 300. And they add more every year. And the drug companies come right up behind them and go, oh, yeah, we got these drugs for that. Drugs are the cure for everything, as long as they can make a profit off it. They're making $3.7 billion a year selling antipsychotic drugs. That's just antipsychotic drugs. That's not all these other anti-anxiety drugs and all kinds of other stuff. They don't want a cure. They want to sell drugs. So, if we're going to get a cure for this, we're going to have to do it. They're not going to do it for us. They're more interested in making money than they are in curing people or helping people. And they're not helping people with these meds. These are major, powerful tranquilizers that just dope them down. And they won't listen to any other type of treatment modality. Anybody else like, George, who comes along, or these energy healers. You went to an energy healer last night, George. You went to that. We both witnessed what you went through. So this guy drives out evil spirits, and George went and had a session with him. So you want to talk a little bit about your experience there?
Sure. It was very interesting. And I feel incredibly beneficial, because afterwards, after we did this work with this energy healer remotely, I felt it very, very different. The voices came at me very different. There was much less negativity. There was there was less of the attacks. I got one attack after that, but it was like it helped elevate my frequency. It helped clear some things. And one of the things that was interesting is that, growing up, I had this thing. I like dragons. I loved, dragons. And early on, the story the voices spun to me took me away from dragons, took me away from something I loved, and Ken helped me to visualize this dragon as battling them. And I saw in my head this vision of this dragon with his wings unfurling, and boom, when we were working together, and this incredible experience of passion filling my chest again, and being filled with life, and remembering my love for dragons. And it shifted everything, just something as simple as that, going back to something that I loved, that the voices had taken away from me because of this lie that they had spun. Oh, I should put those away. Those are evil. That's not bad. No, it wasn't. It was something that gave me life. It was something I got passionate about, so why not? And as soon as he gave me that gift, it really shifted my internal experience of what I've been hearing since then, and I feel really helped prepare me for this interview.
So what was going on with the voices? They tried to stop you from meeting with him, first of all, right? Didn't they try to discourage you from meeting with him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. What did they tell you, and then what was happening to them while he was working on you? What experience of what were the voices doing while he was working with you?
Well, again, a lot of it's really subtle. There's a big part of this that one of the storylines that is being spun over and over and over again is that this is technology, that this is something that is just technological and it's not, it is not a spiritual thing. It's been a test of my faith. And they say, oh, you shouldn't talk. It's just technology. You know, come on. You don't, there is something inside of you that man has created, and you know, it's not all the spiritual stuff. You know, it is. I go back to that Jay in the pool. This is spirit. This is faith. And you know, they say don't talk to him. You don't need to do that. None of it's going to work. You don't believe in it. And this is so much of this experience has been about what I believe in. How much do I believe? How does that belief fuel my passion, for life? You know, what do I believe is real with the voices? What don't I believe? You know, I at one point when I was at the worst of my addiction, I believed that they were going to come and take me away. I saw visions and I saw things that were nightmarish that, you know, I don't even want to get into. But it was real for me. It was real, and it shook me to my core. And as I recover from this in my sobriety has been a huge part of my recovery. As I you know, go further and further and further into my sobriety, and the less and the less and the less I'm attacked, the less intensity. And what I hear is subtle, and it's a little bit more Machiavellian in terms of how they spin their yarns and how they pull me out of this world. And so I have to be on my toes. I feel like I'm recovering spiritually. And I feel that if we approach healing, if we approach anybody, it doesn't matter whether you hear voices or not, but if you approach it as a way of spiritual recovery, you can find that sense of peace again. And that's my end game goal, is that sense of peace, knowing that we're always going to be battered by these spiritual forces, you know, but how do you maintain a sense of inner strength through this? And my faith, you know, my coming, you know, opening my eyes to a greater spiritual world and religion and you know, praying to Jesus. It sounds, you know, for many people who think, oh, it's just religious. No, it has a impact, because if it gives you life, if it gives you this feeling of love in your heart, that's what matters. And that's what works against this negativity. And the negativity fuels the voices. And that's what they feed off, and they just drain the life out of you.
Yeah, and love and positive feelings are toxic to them. And one thing I wanted to point out is that in all the patients I've worked with, the intelligence of these voices ranges from retarded to very sly and cunning. And yours are some of they're sly and cunning. You know, that I've seen that. This is technology. This is the government controlling your thoughts. This is some outside force that is human made that you can do nothing about. They want you to buy into that. So if you bought into that, oh yeah, this is the CIA or the government doing this, then it removes you from the spiritual battle, the spiritual realm, and brings it up into the outside realm where you can't touch it. You can't do anything about it. You're stuck. You're just being victimized constantly.
And you live with it, and it drains you, and it drains you. If you believe it's the government, it feeds your paranoia.
That's right.
Again, yeah, and that paranoia, that feeling of being watched, that, you know, these are real things that are induced by these negative entities. And you know, one of the things, again, truth for me has been paramount through this entire process. I have to share the truth of my experience and what I hear, what I go through, what I understand it to be, and how it affects me. And early on, I said, you know, as I began to recover in my sobriety, I said, you know, my life is an open book. You can see everything, and you know, everything is just transparent with what I do, and that ate away at the paranoia. It ate away at the anxiety, and it took something away from the negative entities that they usually use to attack you.
We need some time.
you're back with us, Mark.
That's great. No, it's great. I didn't come into much there because I think all the preparation we did and the way you took that on that whole journey, George, was brilliant. You actually outlined pretty much everything I think we needed to say in this particular broadcast, because we kind of primed ourselves for it. And I've been listening to it very critically and concentrating, and I think the information's fantastic, and I'm really glad that we've been able to bring everyone this information tonight and share it with everyone. You know, it's very, very important. The shows that myself and Jerry have done in the past have kind of primed us for this moment where we have somebody who's actually experienced this and gone through it, because I've had to talk to Jerry about particular instances that I've had with these entities, through with people that I know have been suffering from them, and now we get that given back to us by someone who's actually recovered from the whole thing. And I think that the fact that because your background is in therapy, George, we talked about this at the beginning, that I think that's incredibly important, because you had that extra awareness that maybe what was happening wasn't actually happening to the real you. That's something we talked about. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people have, because their negativity comes from things that have happened to them. In other words, a lot of it's through some kind of abuse, some trauma. And when that trauma gets in, they have lost their sense of self. But because you never completely lost your sense of self, I think that that is, to me, what's fascinating about what you're saying.
Thank you, Mark, really. And you said it very eloquently. I appreciate that, because you're right. You know, it's interesting. 76% of people who hear voices, there's a religious preoccupation about it. And it's interesting because the voices early on said they were the voice of God, and they said I was Jesus. And I said, no, I'm just myself. I'm who I am. Now I'll share with you who I am. This is who I am, but I'm not Jesus. And you know, I'm not a prophet. These are other things that they tell people. And Mark, I appreciate how you said that that I held on to my sense of self, because I feel, again, that was a huge blessing. It was a huge strength of mine that has got me through this. And I continue to hear voices, and I continue to, I feel, recover from this process. And what I have found is what has been what I have shared to you today, to help me find this place of peace again in my mind, where I'm not battered by, it doesn't matter, anything, you know, stories that take away my sense of peace and that take me out of being in this world, because it's this world where we actually have an impact. And I want to be the best me I can be in this world.
That's really kind of uplifting and inspirational, George, because I think that will help people who've been really downtrodden by what's happened to them. Because what has come over to me is that what myself and Jerry have been talking about, and what Jerry's been talking about for much longer than I have, in the respect of the sort of area we're talking about, it, the specific area, is that I've known Jerry for about 3 years now. And when I first got in touch with Jerry, I was talking about something that was happening to someone very close to me. And through the evolution of what the work really that Jerry's been doing with Sherry Sweeney, and the book that Jerry's recently published, and That's a Lie, the idea that's a lie, this is not me. I know conclusively that worked, and that just saved someone's life recently, and it's turned their lives around, because they had to know that it wasn't them. In your case, it's more interesting because that separation doesn't seem to have quite occurred. And that's just wanted to reiterate that point, because I think it's an important one in conclusion.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the way it's got to go. I mean, we have to move toward away from the medical establishment, the psychiatric and the psychological establishment, into a more spiritual type healing. I mean, because what they're doing is not working for schizophrenia or mental health. The situation's getting worse. It's not getting any better. The violence is getting worse. The truth has to be brought out, and you know, we're going to be labeled quacks by the establishment, and George is going to be labeled nuts, and I'm going to be labeled a nutcase, and Mark, they already know you. You've been attacking them forever. So
that's really funny, because they have very limited tactics. you know, and the tactics are so limited, they've become comedic. And that is, to me, important, because we know that we're working on a completely different level to this stuff. So in other words, it's background chatter. It's not even proper interference anymore. I mean, I think it's worse when things go wrong. And I think these things can jump in very dangerous ways. And I think this idea of being constantly aware, and I don't mean like constantly over vigilant, you know, I mean, having your own awareness, being aware of your own awareness. And that's a sort of meditational state in a way. But for years and years, I've carried that around with me. But it doesn't always stop negative things happening, but it makes you aware of what is going on around you, and aware that these things may be brought in from some other dimension or angle than you are actually experiencing. And that to me is really important, because I've had several things like that have happened. There's something absolutely supernatural that's come in. And once you're aware of that, I think you can start building up more of a defense. Again, defense is the wrong word, more of an awareness to actually what's rather than vigilance. I'm trying to get this over in a clear way. So rather than vigilance, awareness, a relaxed awareness, which you obviously know about, George, because that's come across very clearly tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, not all your thoughts belong to you. People need to know that. You know, they come in from other sources. They come in from your memory, and these things use your memory against you. You know, one thing I've seen, George, is they have access to the patient's memory. They can go in there and pull up any rotten thing you've ever done. I've had patients who did some small thing, you know, 20 years ago, and they would go in there and they pull that up and they just throw it in his face. Did you experience that same thing? They go in and they just pull up randomly all this garbage and just throw it in your face to try to whip you up into a negative state?
Absolutely. You know, yeah, that's a big part of this process. And again, you know, it takes me to my past, and so it can drag me down. I can feel fear and anxiety and depression. It takes me out of this life and being the best I can be. And that's a common occurrence.
And it just doesn't happen with people who hear voices. It happens, you know, it happens to all of us. Oh, well, I shouldn't have said that, or did he take that the wrong way, or people are talking behind my back, or, you know, stuff like that, you know, or you do something wrong and you just keep beating yourself over the head with it. It's not you who's beating yourself over the head. It's these things generating negative emotional energy.
Yeah.
Did you talk about the blocking the patterns? You had did you talk about the finishing the sentence and the nonsense syllables?
That was an interesting one. Yeah, one again, turning everything into a positive. And so what would happen is I would begin to hear a sentence that would be like, "I'm going to kill you." Okay, and so in the middle of the sentence, I would interject my own thought, so that they would begin with, "I am going to," and then I would interject, "Get you a vodka Collins," and I would laugh at the absurdity of it. You know,
and how'd they react to that?
Well, but it was stymied for a while, and it was like they would come back again, and I would do it again and again and again and again. These voices are 24/7, Jerry. I mean, you know, it's even now I can still hear slight, you know, I can hear if I shift my awareness to it, I can still hear it. And you know, I want to underscore, you know, meth was horrible. It did horrible,
very dangerous drug, very dangerous.
Horrible. It is the worst thing out there. And it did this. It eroded away at my spiritual sense of self, and I'm going through a lot of work to recover from that. And you know, these voices are a product of that. And I think all these things in life that eat that deteriorate, that eat away at our spiritual bodies, we have to stay spiritually fit, as well as physically fit, as well as emotionally fit. I mean, there's many different parts of our being that we have to take care of. And I think for many people, we neglect the spiritual part of it because we don't see it. Our faith is eroded. And this, for me, hearing something that is not there constantly and having it affect my body and my sense of my feelings and feeling the sensations and the things that I have felt, and then seeing the things that I've seen. It it has completely turned my world upside down, and made me become attuned and more aware of the spiritual body, that spiritual sense of what is happening to it.
It's the most important thing, George. I mean, the whole idea that everything goes back into materialism is the trap. That's the trap. That's where this stuff gets in. This idea that we are just living in this material world. And that, I think, is a good place to leave it, because we've been going about an hour and 40 minutes. And I think that the information in this broadcast should be heard by as many people as possible. So I think if we wrap it up now, maybe come back and do a little follow-up, I think that would be much more powerful than if we carried on for another half an hour, because we're getting up to an hour 40 now. And I think that's probably the limit to what a lot of people want to watch on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. I mean, that primer that we had last Friday when things didn't work out, I think really helped, because it gave me a real insight into where you were coming from, George. So I didn't really have to say anything. And I'm quite thankful for that, because I'm pretty tired tonight. So listening to you two, especially you, George, has been fantastic. And Jerry, we're going to do more shows in the future. And I hope you'll come on again, George. Would you come on again?
That would be wonderful. I'd be honored, Mark.
That's great, George. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Jerry.
Goodbye, George.
You bet.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to be back on RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I was doing 5 days a week, a bit too much with all the other stuff I want to do. So that's 8 p.m. UK time, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Of course, there's the show 9:30 p.m. on Sunday. And I'm going to try and do live broadcasts like this every Friday. So do watch out for them. Thanks for everyone who's listening. Thanks to everyone who's supporting the show. And we'll see you soon. Thanks to Jerry and thanks to George. I think this has been one of our most important broadcasts for a very long time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Cheers.